All right, we are live. Welcome, Sean, to Around the Coin. I'm really excited to have you on and dive in today.
Thanks, Mike. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. So your title is the CEO of Kickfurther. I was looking a little bit into the background. You guys have been running for a while now. 2014, you started the company. Can you give me a little history as to the transition of how you originally started it, what you initially tried to set out to do, and how things have kind of evolved to where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. So in the very, very early days, my background prior to starting Kickfurther is in supply chain management. So my parents run a company, China Performance Group. They outsource manufacturing, right? So helping to improve supply chains and reduce margins, right? So I worked in the family business for a while, and I saw that there was this big opportunity to actually start my own product company, right? So I started a merchandising company, pretty classic story, buying products from manufacturers overseas, making them a little bit different and then selling them as white labeled or exclusive products to retailers here in the US. And we had good success. Our best seller was a 36-inch fiber optic Christmas tree, like
Hmm.
nothing super exciting, right? But we did like 7 containers of those Christmas trees in like a year. It was and as the business scaled, we got up to two, like that order was a $250,000 order of these fiber optic Christmas trees all on one PO. And at that point with my product business, we encountered this issue of, hey, I need to pay my factory a 30% down payment before they're even going to book me a production slot, right? And that 30% down payment, as the order sizes grew, became a bigger and bigger constraint for my business in terms of my ability to actually pay the factories and get the inventory delivered. So I remember I went out, and my main retailer customer at the time would host these vendor conferences to build relationships with the people that were selling them stuff, right? So we went to this vendor conference. I went around and we would talk to the other vendors, and it's like, hey, how are you funding your inventory? And nobody really had a unified solution. It was like, I get it from my Uncle Joe, I'm putting it on a credit card. I'm working with this banker that I know, so it was just like everybody had a different answer. And at the time for my business that had existed for just over a year, we were looking at going to AR factoring, which would have been a 5% discount on my PO per month of financing that I needed, and I needed 90 days. So you think like a wholesale business operating on a 30% margin, I was looking at 15% of that going out the door day one, a 15% discount on my PO just to be able to pay to fund the production of my inventory, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that to me, it was just like it went from having this business, it was profitable, it was growing. As soon as I introduced this cost of financing, it kind of flipped the equation. And every deal we had to get financing for pretty much put us in the red. And so
Wow.
we encountered this issue where it was like not only was it a major bottleneck and constraint to growth, but it literally we couldn't grow anymore, right? So it was like we went from doing this to going almost completely flat because we couldn't fund ongoing purchase orders. And I was taking a business law class at the time. I went to, and I just remember like, how has nobody figured out a better inventory funding solution for the businesses we work with? And I kind of had this crazy idea of, oh, what if we just took like the Kickstarter model and we brought that over to inventory funding and we leveraged a consignment contract? And that was kind of like the whole idea at the very beginning. We put together a business model, applied to accelerators, got into Boomtown, and 7 years later, here we are.
Wow. So let me make sure I wrap my mind around this. So the problem if you're selling a physical product is that you have to buy the product first. So your PO, your purchase order is the purchasing of the product to then therefore sell it. You have to have upfront cash to buy it, obviously, before you sell it. So there's a period of time between buying it and selling it that you're floating the cost of the inventory. And most people back then were just financing it through banks. They would borrow money from banks or borrow from wherever, but it wasn't systematic, and it sounds like it was expensive. Banks were and other people were charging a lot of money to get access to that kind of float capital, which seems pretty low risk loans, right? Is that kind of the thesis here? Is that they're almost mispriced loans where they were really high previously because of whatever reason the banks had more of an whatever model they used to use. But today, you guys bring the prices down by realizing that, hey, if you have a predictable physical product that's going to sell, you can take a loan out for much less. And you say, and if that's true, then you said, well, how can you find a new revenue source, a new way to pay these companies to buy their products? And that's where you take the Kickstarter model, which is like a crowdsourced model. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it's pretty close. So it's like, so physical product companies, anyone who sells a physical product, you have to pay some factory to make it first. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you pay that factory? Where does that cash come from? Right. That's like the classic inventory finance pinch. And
Mm.
so that was the problem we were trying to solve of like, how do we even enable businesses to continue to grow if they don't have access to inventory finance, right? If it was a business like mine that didn't have a rich Uncle Joe or someone else that they could lean on to provide the funding, right? Where does a business like that go to get the inventory funding support they need to continue to grow their business? And there just wasn't a strong solution, right? Really for
Mm.
these, what I would describe as underserved entrepreneurs, right? People that don't have the professional networks, but they've got a great product or a great idea and they're trying to take it to the next step.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so there is it, would you consider this a marketplace for those people on the funding side that come in and assess deals individually? Or how does the funding side of the business work?
Yeah, 100%. So it's a true marketplace. You could log in today, sign up, and you could be funding inventory for product businesses within 10 minutes. Our sign up process is pretty smooth, I think. So yeah, anybody, it's available to anyone currently in the U.S. over the age of 18. So that's one side, and on the other side, we're serving entrepreneurs in the U.S. selling physical goods. Again, has to be U.S. based inventory as well.
It has to be US based for regulatory reasons.
No, like really operational reasons. So to a certain
Hmm.
extent, yes, like the legal environment in different countries is slightly different. But the underlying consignment contract actually translates really well to other jurisdictions. But it's more along the lines of, language barriers and translating the whole website and then reporting taxes and income and like having different jurisdictions for that. So there's like a big global opportunity. It simplifies our job from an operational perspective significantly to start in the US. And another benefit of the US is we have much stronger credit institutions here in the US than a lot of other countries have. So that's another thing that we can use here to our benefit. That's like not necessarily available in, like the BRIC countries, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China.
So they don't have the credit support, meaning the banking industry, isn't this? Wait, what? How does that play in here? So if individual people are funding the businesses, do do those individual people need to be? How does the credit side of it factor into the
Yeah.
funding?
So, you mentioned like, so are banks expensive? So actually, no, banks are super cheap, right? If you can get funding from a bank, it's super cheap, but you just can't. It like if you have existed for 18 months or 2 years as an organization, no bank is going to fund your inventory. It's considered extremely risky, right? So it's not that banks are expensive, it's that they're just simply not available to the entrepreneurs that we serve. And as it relates to your question, for us, it's not that the it's not that the uh, it's not that it's low risk. It's that it is. We've developed a scorecard that's very specific for physical product companies, and part of that scorecard in terms of who we allow onto the platform, right? Because you can imagine if our failure rate was 10%, suddenly everything on the platform becomes more expensive as a marketplace, right? Because you have to
Mm.
deal with that cost of the losses, right, suffered by the people that are putting up funds if you have a high failure rate. So one of the things we invested in as an organization is what we call our checklist scorecard, which is effectively it's like a pretty much like a questionnaire that yields some scores on risk metrics for product businesses, right? And we try to only onboard and introduce strong product companies that we believe that the inventory will sell to our community of funders. Otherwise, kind of like the fundamental currency of trust starts to break down on the marketplace, right? And then the
Mm.
whole thing starts to fall apart.
Interesting. Interesting. So what kind of stuff works best? on there?
Huh.
What kind of the
I
specific
think I think what
product
you're asking
category?
me is what is your secret sauce?
Well,
um,
is it? I mean, I think of your secret sauce as the ability to determine what companies would be best fundable, right? But well, maybe it's the same question, but kind of like what companies work the best? You know, what companies are in this niche where they need funding that they can't get it? Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my mind around it still.
Yeah, I mean, so think like very classic is a direct to consumer kind of company, right? So you did
Mm.
an Indiegogo or a Kickstarter campaign, it took off, right? You sold $150,000 of inventory, and then it's like, what's next? Okay, so you did one campaign, you have like maybe one production run under your belt, right? And then you need to produce the next $100,000 of inventory. Okay. But the money, the 150 you got from Kickstarter Indiegogo, 75 of that went to produce the goods, right? 50 of that went to your marketing agency, 10 of that paid for overhead, and 15 of it went to Kickstarter, right? To pay for their fees. And so by the end, you've got like pretty much $0 in your bank account, but now you've got a product the market likes, and you
Uh,
need to come up with 100 grand to pay your factory to manufacture the next run, right? So where do you go when that's kind of the trajectory you're on as an entrepreneur? Banks aren't going to fund you, right? So you have to find another solution, and that's like one example of entrepreneurs we work well with. Or another example is somebody that's selling on Amazon. They're also selling through Shopify, but they're also selling to CVS and Target and Costco, right? And you have all of these different distribution channels. They have different costs, they have different margins, right? Different delivery schedules. And if you're working with different lenders, they might say, hey, I'll fund your direct to consumer that's got a 75% margin, right? I like that inventory, but we don't want to provide any funding for your wholesale channel that only has 30% margins, right? That's not the
mm.
business we're in. And so businesses that have omni-channel distribution often find that they can access some finance, but not enough to meet the needs of all of their different distribution channels. So we come in and we say, look, we'll fund the underlying inventory, right? And then I don't care if you sell it to Amazon, right? If you sell it through Amazon or if you sell it to Target or whoever, right? As long as the inventory is sold, it triggers the underlying consignment contract. We see that because we're tied in to whatever the inventory management system is that the entrepreneur uses, right? And then we invoice them against that consignment contract, get paid, and distribute the funds on a pro rata basis to the
Oh, okay.
users.
Okay, cool. So the consignment piece is a key piece. The consignment meaning that you let me think about this for a second. So the person who owns the product is still the funder, the investor, until the point at which it's sold. Is that the idea of consignment?
Yeah, exactly. So what you're doing on Kickfurther is you're actually buying a package of goods, which we then aggregate all of those orders together. We place it on consignment with a product business, and then as the product business sells it, they pay you back for the inventory you funded, the
Oh, that's
inventory
so
you bought.
interesting. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's basically
thank you.
the whole yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. It's like the business doesn't need to own the product between the point at which it's purchased and the point at which it's sold. There's no value to the business. It's not like they care, they probably would prefer not to own it while it's sitting on the shelf. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's super
It's
interesting.
it takes it off their balance sheet. It's no longer a liability for the businesses that we work with, right? So when you work with Kickfurther, you're actually selling somebody else's inventory, right? So it's like you're kind of like a business getting a commission payment. So it's like one of
Mm,
these unique attributes that makes us certain businesses love this, right? They don't have to report a liability on their balance sheet. We play really nice if they're working with a bank and they have an existing lien on their business. We can come in and fund more inventory that's totally separate from that lien and their balance sheet because it's our inventory that they're helping us sell, right? So the underlying consignment structure, it's like one of those innovations that I'm pretty
yeah.
like, I don't know, we just came up with it and it's worked. And as we continue to grow the platform, there's like more and more opportunities with it.
Yeah, I wonder if there's more opportunities, like, outside of this specific problem. Because the experience I have with the idea of consignment is, the local store that sells used jeans and t-shirts, where it's like
Yep.
these are owned by somebody else, but they hold them here for sale. So if you buy them, then, the store gets a percentage. And in your case, Kickfurther would get a percentage of what you sell. Is that how you structure your pricing? Is percentage of revenue?
Yeah, exactly. So no, we are. So we're a percentage of the raise, very similar to other
Percentage of it.
crowdfunding platforms. So if a company comes to us, they raise $100,000 of inventory, we earn a flat 5% success fee, and that's all
Hmm.
inclusive of transaction fees, credit card processing, whatever else, right? So if you as a user wanted to participate on the platform, you can buy inventory with your credit card, and that comes out of our 5% success fee. We don't charge the business for that, which is different, than
Yeah.
Indiegogo and other platforms where those fees often are just passed through to the business.
Yeah, yeah, I like it. On the site, it seems like it leans towards, at least the initial landing page leans towards companies.
Yeah.
Are companies the bottleneck, and then it's much easier to find the investors or the funders, or who are the funders generally, and how do you find them?
Yeah, so our funders are users, you, me, anyone else.
Yeah.
We have a couple of funds that are participating on the platform now that
Hmm.
are, taking a little bit more substantial inventory ownership interests, but mostly individuals, you, me, anyone else. A lot of our users have backgrounds in e-commerce, so they know the pain point, they know the problem
Hmm.
they're solving, right? So it's like kind of just translates really well for them. Um, yeah, it's been good,
Hmm.
but pretty much all individuals.
Hmm. And is there I feel like I'm drilling you with questions, so feel free to change the topic here, but I find it super interesting. So when a do you call them investors or funders?
Funders or
Funders,
inventory
yeah.
buyers.
Inventory buyers. I like funders. So a funder goes on there. Is there real knowledge that, or is there advantages between different funders? Are there some funders on there making significantly more in returns than others based on their insight in e-commerce or something else?
Yeah, I mean, I won't try to guess at what the secret sauce is where some people are more successful than others. But yeah, absolutely. Right. Like there's going to be
Hmm.
some people, because we leave that choice up to the individual, so you
Yeah.
can, if you pick all the best deals and they all work out well, you're going to be doing better than if you end up, in a deal that gets canceled or fails to sell through the inventory.
Yeah, I wonder if it would be kind of interesting is if you had a leaderboard. Do you make that public where you can see funders can see other funders' investments and returns, kind of like in a
It's funny.
competitive?
Yeah, we had something very similar to that for a while. That was opt-in. So if you wanted to,
Yeah,
you could participate in that. And we kind of turned off a bunch of those gamification features once, like, I don't know, gamification started to come under fire as something that was like kind of cheap and not as like cool. Like we thought it was cool early on, but I thought it was cool. I still think it's cool, but yeah, our users didn't like it as much as I thought they would, so we
huh?
just turned it off. It took more support than it seemed to create value for our community.
What's the pushback? What did you see people had?
Just little things like like I don't want this to be public. I don't want people to know, how much that I'm participating. Or for the people that, were participating, it was like they would ask us questions like, how is this guy getting more points
Yeah,
than me? And it's like, I can't tell you
yeah,
any of that private information about how this guy's operating his account. You know what I mean? So it's just like,
yeah.
it created more questions than it solved. And it was like, why are we killing ourselves, supporting this thing,
Yeah, yeah, no, it makes sense. I almost feel like there's an angle where it's similar to AngelList in a way where it's pseudo transparent. You could see the number, I think on AngelList, which is a marketplace for venture deals, like early stage tech startups, and you could see, they have individual investors and you can see if they list it what deals they've done, but you can't see the terms. But then as an investor, you can see in their like their dashboard what syndicates are. So these are
Right.
like funds of. So it'd almost be like if you had a group of funders aggregated together. So it'd be kind of interesting if I could give money to a funder on Kickstarter who's a top dog on there. He's number 3 ranking, and so I say, okay, I'll give this to Eddie, and Eddie's going to effectively have control of funds. Could be. I
No.
mean, I don't know if it's a goal for you guys to increase funding or more on the business side.
It's one of those
Yeah,
things where actually we're considering that kind of as a premium feature, right? So it's like, hey, if you pay us a little bit for this additional functionality, what we can do is you can have, like, let's say you can follow Eddie, right? So you say,
Mm,
I want to follow Eddie, right? Every time Eddie does something, we give you a reservation that lasts for like 24 hours. And then you still get the right. You can say, yes, I want to take that reservation, or no, I don't, right? But then you get a spot like next to Eddie if you want,
mm.
right? So that's kind of the way we're thinking about it, because one of the big issues traditionally for us is that our deals fund before our users have the opportunity to get in them, right? We used to fund these deals, or we still do sometimes fund them in like an hour, like 200,
Wow.
$300,000 funded in an hour. Yeah. Sometimes in minutes.
So it's so the bottleneck is much more on the supply side. The companies is
Oh yeah.
where if you had more companies, you could go faster as opposed to more funders.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Huh. That's interesting. So it's, do you think that's permanent? I mean, does that say something about the market at large, or is that just our current state where there's more money out there and there is products that are useful and being purchased?
Um, That's an interesting question. I would say there's definitely something about the market right now where there is a ton of money sloshing around, it seems, and
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like they know where to put it, right? Like
Yeah.
when you hear these people talking about like negative interest rates in Europe and stuff like that, it's like, yeah, you've got tons of capital in the world that's looking for yield, desperate for yield, I would even say. And and the big challenge is, how do you know, like it's easy to lend money out. How do you know that the money's going to come back with friends, right? Like that's the big question. And so, yeah, that like
Friends. I like
with
that.
friends, right? That's the goal. And so, what we've done, and that's why we invested in the checklist scorecard, right? Because if the whole
Yeah.
thing falls apart, if the deals are failing, if the businesses aren't performing well, and so that's why our bottleneck is businesses. For every 10 businesses, we'll get in at the very top of our funnel, like one makes it through to the platform, right? So we're pretty selective. But the nice
Mm,
thing is, once somebody started using Kickfurther, they typically stick around for, lots and lots of deals. Like on average, they're funding with us for more than 2 years.
mm. So the folks you're saying no to, the 90%, these, if you did have them on the platform and they got funded, then what's the big risk there? That they don't sell the product?
Yeah, they
That they're
don't sell
just,
the
yeah.
product. I mean, this is the classic product
Mm,
entrepreneur risk, right? So if the inventory doesn't sell, if you're not able to sell it to who you think you're going to be able to sell it to, right, your expected customer, then who do you sell it to, right? The big
mm,
problem with physical products is there's two major risks that we analyze on our platform. I think give us an edge is, one is supply chain risk, right? That's my background. So how risky is it that this entrepreneur is just never going to get the stuff that they think that they're going to get, right? And if they never have it produced at the quality level they expect to receive it, that business is going to be dead in the water, right? So that's one major risk we look at. The other is distribution risk, right? How risky is it that
mm,
these people get the stuff and then they can't figure out what to do with it, right? And it just
mm,
starts chewing in to, like, storage fees, right? Like there are costs to carrying the inventory as well. So it's like, and overhead, whatever else. So, those are two things we look at. And yeah, if the inventory doesn't sell, if that distribution risk kind of comes to fruition, then, we kind of, well, one of the nice things we do is we give our users the opportunity to take delivery, right? So if you
mm,
funded like a duvet or like a sweater or something, theoretically you could take delivery of it. Hey, I'll pay $10, have this thing shipped to me for the cost of goods, right? So that's an
mm.
option that we give to our users, and some of them take. But you can imagine if you put in $50,000, right? You're not looking for two pallets of sweaters to be shipped to your house, right? So we also
Yeah.
offer a liquidation offer option to those bigger users. And if you take a liquidation, then it's going to result in a haircut for the investor, for the
Yeah.
buyer.
Interesting. Would you say 90% of the businesses that are applying are the other 90% you're not taking? They are serious businesses, right? They're people with real products and some traction, and basically your metric here, or your filter to decide whether or not to take them is, do we think they're going to be able to sell the product and make the product and sell the product? And do you have a, like, do you have a bar as to, like, there's a 50% chance you'll be able to sell it, or when you put it on Kick Further, is your philosophy like it is absolutely going to be sold? We guarantee it without guaranteeing it. Do you try to swing for perfection or more so for volume, or is that something you even
We
think about?
we try to swing for perfection as much as
Yeah.
possible, right? Because the reality is, if you look, one of the things that we're able to do is we're able to get this inventory funding to these entrepreneurs at like pretty much best in market prices, right? And so
Mm,
and if a lot of our deals were failing, right, and we went for volume and we said we don't care who's getting funded, right? Come to us, we'll just go for volume. Then very quickly, what happens is those failures pile up, and then costs across the platform skyrocket, right?
mm,
If we let anybody on, right, our businesses would have to offer 3 or 4% a month to get their deals funded, as opposed to like 1.5%, which is where,
mm.
pretty much where it's at now. And so by being selective, we're able to create a better product and increase our value to both our users and to the entrepreneurs that we successfully serve.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Can you give me a sense for where you guys are at in terms of, I guess, headcount or businesses funded or revenue or whatever else is indicative of traction?
Sure. So we just crossed $75 million of inventory funded. That was like last month or around there. So that's been since 2015. Of that 75 million, about 25 million of that has happened in the last 12 months. So we're on a pretty nice growth clip right now. We're looking at probably close to 100% growth this year. And we have a team of 26 right now.
Awesome, awesome. Congrats. That sounds really exciting, especially in the last year to grow that much is really amazing.
Yeah.
I'm super curious on the production of physical products, just in the marketplace at large. Is this happening? Are most companies who are making physical things and selling them doing them in China, in the US, in other countries? Have you seen trends or changes recently for e-commerce businesses selling physical products?
Yeah. So we send about 70% of our funding ends up going overseas. So that's kind of like the split of manufacturing we see. And the majority of that is going to China, right? So
Hmm.
probably my guess is that more than 50% of all supplier payments are still going to China, right? I saw, or I can say like anecdotally, we observed that there were some entrepreneurs that were interested in shifting their production operations out of China, especially with like the trade war and some of the stuff that happened
Hmm.
there. We had a couple of our entrepreneurs just got kind of like knocked over the head with that. And so they were looking at making a change. Also, China's reputation, their brand, has come significantly under fire recently. And
Hmm.
so yeah, like but like with the camps and everything else, right? Like it's not China's doesn't have a very good reputation now in the broader community, and so the feeling I'm getting, what I sense is that there is people that are interested in building a business that has like that triple bottom line, of like not just for money, but also good for our stakeholders and good for the community, right? I think those businesses that are trying to appeal more to what I like really typically millennial consumers, right, that care more about those attributes. I see those businesses are starting to look at bringing their manufacturing back to domestic, right? That there's an increasing made in America trend to support these, uh, like environmental
Hmm.
sustainability kinds of product companies, which again, millennials are very much driving their consumer
Yeah.
trends in that direction,
Yeah.
right? Millennials will spend more to buy from a company that's not using child labor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, is it a brand of China that is true for like a significant amount of manufacturers in China, or is this like a 1 in 100 manufacturers are abusing people or the planet or some other process in manufacturing? I mean, do you think it's a? I don't even know the reputation of Chinese manufacturing other than it's kind of questionable sometimes, but I is it justified? I mean, how bad is the reputation? I mean, I associate it with being cheap, I guess, in my mind, more than child labor, but I could just be totally, not exposed to this. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's like one of those things where it's like if you dig into it, like, look, I don't want to. I'm not going to cast aspersions on any given like
yeah.
factory, right, or entrepreneur because it's like, look, I'm 100% sure there are some very good factories in China still doing everything right, doing what they can do. But the reality is that it's like kind of like the Chinese government has their hooks in all of these
Yeah.
people, right? And if the Chinese government doesn't like what one factory or another is doing, they'll just shut them down like very easily with no problem. And inevitably, when you send money to China, who are you empowering to a certain extent? The
Mm,
Chinese government
mm,
is getting taxes, and you are empowering the Chinese economy when you send money over to China. And it's like, is it look again? All I'll comment on is that the reputation is that the Chinese government does not have a good reputation right now. People are looking at them like with what's going on with the Uyghurs and whether that's forced labor, whether that's happening in like
mm,
the Xinjiang cotton, right? How is that being produced? Like, there's all these questions now, and nobody
mm.
really trusts that China is giving the real answers. So there's just been a big breakdown of trust, and with that, I think like. It's not even that the manufacturers are doing anything necessarily bad. It's that China itself, it has a bad reputation now between
Hmm.
Hong Kong, Taiwan, the Uyghurs, um, and their militarism and saber
Yeah.
rattling. Right? Like, there's just been a lot
Yeah.
of. So anyway, I don't want to talk too
Yeah.
badly
No.
about China because I'd like to not get disappeared. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's good. It's good pressure to have. I think the worst case scenario is you ignore problems. And if you ignore the problem for too long, it gets too big and then it gets overwhelming and then it just subsumes and consumes society in negative ways. And I think that was in large part like what happened in the 20th century, first part of it, which was you kind of ignore stuff for so long and then it gets to be major problems and you have wars and everything else. And I think the pressure, like money is so great in that it effectively points attention. And when you say, hey, we don't want to fund China for whatever reason, we think that they're not being transparent or their businesses aren't up to standards for labor laws, fantastic, because now you buy in another country and that creates a pressure on China and Chinese manufacturers to change. Like I remember a good friend of mine he was in charge of Uber in North America, or at least in California. And he was at the time, and he was telling me we went to the airport. We got off the airport together, and we go downstairs and we look at the app, and there's like, oh, 15-minute wait for Uber. And he's like, oh, let's go downstairs and grab a taxi. And I was like, man, why do you want to grab a taxi? You work for Uber. How could you possibly want to support a taxi? And he said, oh, if I take a taxi, that's implicitly telling Uber that they need to step the game up. If I'm a Uber fanboy and I'm willing to sit here for 15 minutes and take a less experience, then it's not really appropriate. It's not connecting the value offered with the value I'm giving it. And I found that it's like actually a pretty good way to think about it. It's like your dollar. We think of voting as a once every 4 year kind of thing, but it's really you literally do vote with your dollar every time you spend money on a thing. You know better than anyone. It just supports the businesses. Millennials voting with supporting the ideas of sustainability and production quality and other things they support. It really does change the world. I mean, it's the kind
yeah,
of thing that points trends in certain directions. And it seems to me like the United States is in a great place to be competitive with manufacturing because the levels of standard of living in China has gone up significantly. So there's not this massive arbitrage there once was. And also, we have a lot of people in this country who are out of work. There's a major truck driving group that's going to be looking for ideally some sort of physical labor. And it's like manufacturing kind of makes sense. And I don't know how much IP or how much, I mean, obviously you need the physical infrastructure and the tooling to be able to do it. But it seems in large part we have that in archive, at least in the US. We had been at one point a major manufacturer. You mentioned you're in Buffalo where they make all the World War II planes. It's like we conceptually, I think that we still remember how to do it in large part. I wonder if it'll be centralized, like in the case of Detroit, where it's central automotive manufacturing, or if we'll see a more distributed, decentralized manufacturing technique based on the way the world works today. I guess physical products you kind of need to be centralized, but I'm curious how if you see that happening now, whether there's cities that are kind of being known for manufacturing in the U.S. or if companies are all over the place.
um, I would say probably what we've observed is it's like where labor is a little bit cheaper is where you're going to find the factories that are, there's more manufacturing. You probably won't find a lot of like factories producing physical goods in the middle of San Francisco or New York City. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
maybe a little bit further outlying where there's a more reasonable cost of living. Um, but I also think I've been of the opinion for a while that the whole idea of like, oh, let's bring manufacturing back, that's going to bring jobs back. It's like a big lie, right? The
you think
reality
so?
is that yeah, American U.S. Western labor is way too expensive for anything that's labor intensive, right? Labor intensive means jobs. And so if it's not labor intensive, what is it? It's automated. And if it's automated, what
Mm,
you have is it's capital intensive, which is exactly what's happening. You've got people that have a lot of money investing in automated machinery that's able to produce goods at not even exactly price competitive, but pretty close, right? Because you don't have to pay for shipping, import duty, right? All those other things. So it gives you a bit of an advantage and you're able to get to pretty close to the cost for like, for a very automated thing that maybe you need like, one or two employees to run a line. You don't need 75 employees working in a factory line, right? So I'm like, it's great. I 100% support that manufacturing is coming back to the US. And to your point, I think it's awesome that millennials are voting with their dollars. They are demonstrating with their consumer behavior that they want to support companies that are investing in things that they consider important, which is like environmental, sustainability, governance, right? We're seeing that
mm,
ESG in the product space is becoming popular. But no, I think it's a bit of a lie to say that
yeah.
manufacturing is bringing any kinds of jobs back to America, right?
Maybe it's going backwards to look at it like the point of or the way we measure progress in society is by people physically working to make things. The way of the future does seem like, I mean, the video I watched with Tesla and their production line, these giant robots carrying and welding and gluing, which all that stuff seems the way it should be. Seems like the way cars should be made. We don't.
Yeah.
Why do we need 1,000 people to make a car? But at the same time, how do people repurpose or recalibrate for that type of work? And obviously, there's always some work on the tip of the spear, which is on building the machines that build the products. But certainly, in terms of volume, I this is one area actually that I'm pretty on the fence. I've swung back and forth over time. I'm curious to hear if you have a viewpoint on this. But universal basic income, or UBI, is a concept that the government would collect taxes and then give people equal payments, similar to how they already did in the stimulus check, where it's like $1,000 a month or whatever the amount is. And the idea is that money that's airdropped to people is going to pay for their basic living standards, your rent, your food. So you're not going to be homeless. You don't have to worry about existential crises. And then you could, create and do other things with your free time instead of working at a, minimum wage job. I think the opposing view is that like this is I think today I'm pretty against the concept because I feel that products should inevitably get cheaper over time. That we're in a world where Amazon and all the production manufacturing and automation is it's displacing jobs, yes, but it's also making things much cheaper. We can 3D print a house, you can print products, everything is so much cheaper. So I might only need 1/10 of what I needed 50 years ago to have the same standard of living. And so there's a natural decrease, like a downward pressure consolidation in what it costs to live. So I don't know, long-winded way of saying, but I'm curious if you have a take on it. It seems still pretty, debatable if it makes sense.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So it's like one of those things I used to think about a lot. So fundamentally at Kickfurther, we didn't talk about this. One of the things I cared about a lot when I created this was that for me, I just think about the world like super simplistic terms. There's two ways you make money. You make money with money, right? By sending your money out and it comes back with friends, right? Or you make money by selling your time. As
Hmm.
far as I know, those are the two ways you make money in this world, right? That you need to live. Everybody needs money to live, right? As technology improves, that second way of making money by selling your time will go further and further and further and further away, right? Automation is coming for everyone other than you, the creative, and me, the salesperson whose job is to talk to humans and sell, right? It's going to be a long time for computers to automate that, right? But accountants, by lawyers, by long range truck drivers, by taxi drivers, right? All of this in the next 2 decades, I see massive, massive swaths of the US labor industry today, right, being automated away and effectively not having jobs. Would you rather pay Amazon 10 cents to do your legal work, or would you rather pay a lawyer
Yeah.
$500 an hour or $50 an hour, right? The first thing that's going to happen is extreme downward pressure on all of the compensation for these roles, right? So you're going to have fewer jobs, and the people that have those jobs are going to be getting paid less, right? And then what's replacing them? Where will the income to support these people come from if their jobs go away, right? And keep in mind, this is happening at the same time that we are entering into a period of the most historic wealth inequality in the world, right? So if your other way of getting capital and getting income is by making your capital work, but we're also living in the environment today where the fewest number of people have control over the greatest proportion of capital ever in the history of mankind. Does that sound crazy? Yes, I think it's actually factually correct. I'm pretty sure that's factually correct, right? Then what
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have is, as we move towards automation and labor goes away, right, then the capital that's going to become increasingly productive will become increasingly concentrated in the hands that it's already concentrated in, right? So if we're already living in the period of the greatest wealth concentration in history, the only thing that can, or logically to me, the only thing that makes sense is that that trend will continue as technology improves, as capital becomes more efficient, as technology becomes better, right? Capital will become more productive, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll continue to concentrate. And then it's like, all right, then you want to like think about the end game. What happens when you've got 99.9% of people don't have income, right? They have no way of acquiring capital because there's no jobs anymore, right? They don't have any capital, so they can't put it to work, right? What's going to happen, right? And to
Mm.
me, I'm like, actually, I think that UBI or some kind of it's effectively Panem and Circenses, right, will be necessary to prevent a French Revolution esque type
Mm.
event, right? Because you just can't have 99.9% of people with nothing to do and no jobs, right? And also no hope, no ability to move up because they don't have capital, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
if you don't have, so I'm like, I don't know. To me, it seems like it will have to happen. Something will come to a breaking point. I don't know whether it's UBI. I don't know whether it's like literally like, hey, we're going to give everybody free internet and free food tickets, right? So you can eat for free and you have access to the internet, right? Everything else you have to, figure out for yourself, right? Like I could see subsidized housing, internet, and food, right? And that would probably keep the population relatively happy. But if you have like a large majority of the population doesn't have the opportunity to make income because their jobs are automated, right? They don't have capital to invest and there aren't opportunities for them to invest capital. Those are like, kind of what I think leads to a unrest and an unhappy population, which is bad for the economy and bad for people that have
Yeah.
capital. So in my view, I'm like, where I see things going is that eventually most individuals will become dollar voting machines. The job
Mm.
of a person in the future will be to be a consumer and to vote with their dollars to drive the direction that society is going in, right?
Mm.
And how do they vote with their dollar? Where do those dollars come from? Probably something like UBI or a similar
Mm.
program like that.
I'm with you on all that. I almost continuing that line of thinking would be I almost view that the cost to start companies is decreasing significantly, and a lot of the consolidation is happening in software. So I view it really as time is the most valuable asset that someone can have if they're thinking about building a career or even a business in software. And so if you had time, if you weren't pressured to have your basic needs met, and you could learn software, you could build a network, you could do the things necessary to start a company. There are these natural, technology doesn't kind of consolidate and then stay there. It consolidates and then explodes, and then it consolidates and explodes. An example of that would be like access to the internet. It's or access to just telephone wires. Like it's physical wires laid around, and then the AT&T, whoever lays all the wires, has all the power. They're the monopoly. But then naturally, without any government intervention on antitrust, it's like boom, boom. Now all physical wires are irrelevant because we have satellites or we have
Hmm.
towers, and then boom, all those are or the towers and then the satellites, and there's like an eclipse happening every time. I think blockchain is a good example of this, and especially as it relates to payments. It's like centralization of payments by the government, and the control that the Federal Reserve has is so powerful. But then it's like, well, now it's completely irrelevant when you have just decentralized money. So I
Right.
think I think it's true that universally, like across the whole physical universe, there's this effect where things tend to consolidate and consolidate to a point, and then they blow up again without any intervention needed. So I tend to think things like Amazon, things like Google, Apple, these large companies we look at as being, overwhelmingly consolidated, they will be irrelevant at some point. There'll be a developmental leap forward in technology that makes that thing that was once, so monopoly. You describe it as a monopoly, but now it's irrelevant. It's like the Elephants Can Dance book.
I
Have you
haven't
heard
read
of this
that.
book?
No.
It's a great book. I think the guy's name is Louis Gershner. He was the CEO of IBM when IBM was effectively like on their heels looking at bankruptcy in the late 80s, 90s. And he came in there and completely switched the business to a services focused business. And the book is so appropriately titled as Elephants Can Dance because it's really like this, massive multi-billion dollar conglomerate that is just changing its business model and pivoting. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's interesting to see how it actually is possible, but it's difficult. Most large companies won't be able to do that. So I don't know. I don't know. It still is. It's an interesting question. I think we'll try it. I think we've already tried it with the stimulus
Yeah.
package. But
I
yeah,
I think it's like if you just yeah, for me it's like you take this if you take the conversation down to like all right where like it's literally how are people going to make money if they don't have jobs, right? And it's like if they can't make money and money is what buys everything, what are they going to do? You can't have people that are starving, right? That don't have the
yeah,
like and it's like are those jobs not going to go away? To me that's logically impossible, right? Those jobs are going away. Long range truck drivers, those are like good paying jobs. That's like 75 100
yeah.
grand a year jobs, right? It's not insignificant, and there's a lot of them. I think it was millions of these long
You
range
know,
truck driver jobs, right?
here's my bet is I think, or here's what I would love to see happen. I think can happen is I was listening to this really good podcast and this guy who started a sustainable farm. And there's a great movie documentary called The Biggest Little Farm. And it's basically about revolutionizing the way food production works instead of thinking it as like monocrop, large, massive acres to produce strawberries or blueberries or potatoes or whatever. That's not sustainable to the ground. Eventually the soil loses nutrients and the food decreases in production quality. And the lack of nutrients is a big reason why people are malnourished or obese, or, we're kind of,
Mm-hmm.
there's this relationship between healthcare costs and food costs. And 100 years ago, it was inverse. It costs a lot to make food, but our healthcare costs were very low. Today, it's the other way around. Our healthcare costs are 18% of our GDP, but our food costs are very low. It's like 7, 8% or something. So
Mm-hmm.
those I think are going to swap again, where there's going to be an enormous amount of physical labor that's necessary to do these farms that produce all different types of fruits and vegetables and meats. And there's going to be like a playbook where investors can buy into these farms, and there'll be hundreds of farms around the city, and they need people to go. And I think it'll be a reconnection to the earth, and it'll be fueled in large part by, yes, we want food that's better, but we also want a world that has animals and plant life, and it's like it's all connected together, and helps the world instead of hurts it with our agricultural tendencies. So
Yeah.
I think that could be a major place that the millions of truck drivers end up going, is to these
Mm-hmm.
like local farms. So we'll see, but I think that's my optimistic viewpoint on it, because it really, you need an answer. You can't
Yeah.
retrain people to be software engineers at late 50s,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, I think the only way that's going to happen is if the money says it's going to happen, right? The
mm,
people that have the money, they have to invest in these farms, right? They have to decide that it's important enough. And I don't know. I guess I'm a little cynical about
mm,
the long term vision of some of the people that control how resources are allocated today, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the big existential threat is are we going to have corruption effectively? Is there going to be a truly free market, not free market, but is there going to be blockades? Are there going to be barriers to making this possible from a regulatory perspective or private lobbying groups and that kind of thing? Which,
Yeah.
it's a good to shine light on it and just
Yeah.
recognize that that is a challenge.
But I'll add this. You said something earlier that I think is a very salient point as it relates to UBI, which is like you and I have the flexibility and the freedom to take risks, which is why you have the opportunity to run this podcast. You know, my family was great and they supported me starting my previous business and they supported me starting Kickfurther, right? And that financial stability, I always knew, right? I'm not like I've been always fortunate that like I knew my family wouldn't let me be homeless or destitute, right? I could go somewhere, I'd have a bed and food, right? And I wouldn't like just be kicked out. And I've met so many people that like they can't go home. Their families are like, we can't afford to pay
Mm,
for you to stay home anymore. And I'm like, wow, like my emotional security, right? Knowing that I will never end up with nothing, right? Gives me the ability to take risks like starting Kickfurther, which is a big risk, right? And most people would say that's a big risk to leave a job or something to start
mm,
something that's quite uncertain, right? And those risks will hopefully, you know, knock on wood, translate into economic opportunity for me, right? But if I didn't have my safety net, would I have been able to take those initial risks that will unlock that economic opportunity for me in the future? No, I don't think so, right? I don't think if I was going to be homeless, I would have been able to start a startup with a very uncertain future. Um,
mm.
and so I
Yeah.
think that one of the big benefits of UBI, and it's like almost impossible to measure or predict, is that if you provide that level of security, right, and everybody in America had the same kind of security I had, what could people do if they knew that they weren't going to end up homeless, if they could take more risks, if they could, you know, take the chance on themselves to pursue, you know, whatever creative outlets or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
what could happen? And that could be a very interesting, you know, society to live in, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so difficult to know. It's like psychology of human beings is it's like I heard this great phrase that Jordan Peterson said once where he's like, and I think he was quoting somebody else, but he's like, if people were in a true utopia, after we were busy feeding ourselves and pleasuring ourselves sexually, the first thing we would do is we would destroy it just to have some problem to solve. And it's like there's something there's something to be said about that. It's like there is no any chase we have, anytime we pursue, this is it. If we only do UBI, then everything will be perfect. That never Human beings are made for problem solving. We're like problem solving machines.
For
So we'll
sure.
make problems, honestly, and even in our own individual lives. So yeah, I'm so humbled by all this stuff because anytime I hear someone speak with certainty, I'm like, probably not right.
Yeah, nothing's 100%, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, like I think that's exactly the point, right? When people are hyper focused on the problem that's right in the front of their face, like how do I not go homeless? How do I not starve to death, right? How do I provide
Mm,
like the basic needs for my life and make sure that I will have those provided for the next 6 months, 9 months, year, right? That I won't lose access to this critical stuff that I need to live. They're going to solve that problem first and foremost, right? And then if you solve that problem for them and you say, hey, you don't have to worry about being homeless. You don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from. Where does that problem solving energy go? Like our society has
mm,
plenty of problems to solve. I guarantee you,
yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
unlocking a lot of problem solving energy in a big part of our population, I'm like, great. I think that would
Yeah.
yield results for us, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And then it goes into like the problem. The problem is building driverless cars and 3D VR headsets that transform us into another world and traveling to other planets. Like those are really exciting problems to solve, which would
Maybe the
be
problem is like I live in a food desert and you know the only thing around me is like pawn shops and gun stores and liquor stores
mm,
and I can start my I read this interesting book about how I can do big little farming and I can do it in my backyard and I can
mm,
create a little micro farm in the middle of this inner city And if it's not successful, that's okay because I'm not going to be
Mm,
homeless, right? But I can put my energy towards something that will create value for me and my community, right? And it's like
mm,
there's this viewpoint that like some people are like, oh, if you make it too easy, people aren't going to do anything, right? They're just going to be lazy and sit around. And I'm like, says who? Like so
yeah,
many of the people that say that, I'm like, if you wanted to, person that's saying that to me right now, you could be lazy and sit around all day. Like most of the people that
yeah,
say that have it made. And it's like, but you don't. You're out there. You continue
yeah.
to go out there and you hustle and you work hard. Why? Because humans have this like ambitious gene as a
It's
species, right? Like I'm like, who have I met that has it made that just sits on their hands? Nobody, right? The most
yeah,
successful people I know are the busiest people I know. And it's like, I
yeah.
don't know. I find that a super weird attitude that you hear pretty
Yeah, I
often.
agree. I think it's largely influenced by your what it was like growing up. You ever heard the expression "rags to riches" in 3 generations and back? It's like,
Yeah.
it's just like, your mom was your parents were farmers, so you could be an engineer, so your kid could be, a doctor, a lawyer, so your kid could be an artist, and then they're poor, and then when you're back to, it's like a cyclical thing, which I think there's some truth to that. And yeah, yeah. Was this the kind of stuff you thought about? I saw you went to Rutgers to study philosophy. Were these? I always wonder what people who went to school for philosophy did. Did you say?
Yeah, I liked philosophy. I always liked because it was one always good for critical reading, which I found very
Hmm.
useful as I parse through contracts and investment docs and stuff like that. Now, I originally wanted to take philosophy to take it into a law practice or go into law, and I decided I didn't
Hmm.
want that. But I love the logical underpinnings of philosophy and the critical thinking that goes into it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that's a lot of what philosophy is it's running these thought experiments, right? What happens to a
Hmm.
world where labor income has gone away, right? What does that world look like? And if that's where I think the world is going to go, what can I do today, right, to prepare myself and maybe to create some technology that creates an excellent capital income opportunity for anyone that participates, that's available to anyone, right? So it's like, absolutely, these are things that I used to talk about with my roommate at Rutgers, who ended up being my co-founder at Kickfurther as well. These are problems we talked
Hmm.
about a lot.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been debating whether to take this podcast and open up these kind of like open form debates, like having a couple people on with a specific topic. Okay, Sean, you give your 7 minute piece on UBI or whatever we're talking about, and then the person on the other side gives their piece, and then there's like an open debate, and you kind of close out at the end. I think it'd be interesting. I think the world could use more structured debates between people who have research and interesting opinions.
Yeah,
But that'll be for another time.
hold them to the
Yeah,
questions, Mike. Don't let them
yeah,
dodge if when you do
yeah. No,
that.
no, there's no dodging. Sean, this is a lot of fun, man. I really enjoyed to get to know you a bit, and congrats on the progress you guys have made with Kickfurther. And yeah, look forward to having you back on someday.
My pleasure, Mike. This is super interesting. So yeah, look forward to tuning in, and thank you for the invite.
All right, buddy. Bye bye.